Hello Rebels, today is Thursday, September 23rd, 2021. My name is Sophie.
And I'm Arabella. We are the new crew members for Rebels Media. Welcome back for the 2021 to 2022 school year.
Here's a short video our media class has prepared to welcome you.
Coming up on September 30th is Reconciliation Day. The last residential schools closed in 1996, but unfortunately, the Indigenous community still suffers from the aftermath from these schools today. Here's some information the Rebels media students have gathered about this topic.
The Indigenous peoples of Canada have endured a long history of racism and discrimination. This started with the Indian Act, which forced Indigenous people onto reserves which were much smaller than the land they used to own. They also were required to get Indian status to receive any benefits from the Act. The main goal of this act was to start the assimilation of the Indigenous peoples into Euro-Canadian culture. The next big step for this assimilation was the residential schools.
Indigenous children, as young as 4, were sent to these schools to educate them. The Indigenous families often had no choice but to send their children to the schools, as they had agents that would go after them if they didn't. They were trying to remove any sense of Indigenous culture and assimilate them into Euro-Canadian culture. The estimated 150,000 children that attended these schools suffered daily abuse from the members of the church that ran the school. This abuse included isolating their children from their family, both at school and outside of it, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and extremely poor living conditions.
They were deprived of basic human rights that we have at school today. These poor living conditions caused disease to spread easily around the schools. An estimated 6,000 Indigenous children died in these residential schools, either from abuse or disease. Just recently, 217 unmarked graves were found near the residential school in Kamloops. This started a period of reckoning, where investigations were conducted at other residential school sites, resulting in a total 1,504 graves being discovered at the 7 sites. The ones that did survive spent the rest of their lives with immense trauma that has gone through generations.
Intergenerational trauma is spread from being passed down through the youth. As the Canadian government supported the violent assimilation of Indigenous people and their culture, students would come back to their families with a lack of understanding of their culture and knowledge of the world, failing to cope and look after themselves. With a lack of a nurturing and caring environment, new parents would be unfamiliar with children and later push them towards coping mechanisms like substance abuse. Such acts paint a negative image on Indigenous people, which are a result of the government's negligence and carelessness.
The unfair treatment continues to this day. Indigenous people and communities in northern regions are ignored by the Canadian government, leading to unclean water on reserves, inflated costs of living, and a lack of social services. There has also been a significant amount of cases with missing and murdered Indigenous women across BC, whose cases have been ignored. The issues have been in the news, yet the government does not take steady action. Such conditions are leading to dangerous conditions for the elderly and young children, damaging their growth and overall health. Their situation only gets worse, with the higher cost of living as families are having trouble staying fed and healthy every day, as everyday items and bills are heavily priced and lack any word or action from the government. With difficult access to quality services and the lower mainland of Canada, families are stuck up north with limited chances at a better life.
Indigenous communities across Canada are suffering today from the treatment their ancestors faced, and such treatment carries on to this day. The abuse, pain, and suffering felt in the past are passed down through generations, and young children are facing the consequences today. As Canadians, it's our responsibility to educate ourselves on our own history and recognize the misinformation and unfair treatment which Indigenous people have and still are experiencing to this moment. The National Day of Truth and Reconciliation is coming up, And some things you can do to help is wear an orange shirt to show your support, donate to Indigenous foundations, and overall teach yourself and others about the horrors the Indigenous people have been forced to endure.
This day is to honor the children who have survived the residential schools, as well as the ones who suffered from the long intergenerational trauma.
On September 30th, we commemorate the loss of those First Nation families who've suffered through racial abuse with the residential schools in the late 1800s, through to the last one closed in 1996. Tens of thousands of First Nations children were taken away from their families and forced to attend classes that separated them from their culture. Those residential schools, though now closed, have left long-lasting effects on Indigenous cultures in many aspects of their lives.
Many children took their lives, sexually abused, and left traumatized from these schools. Early in 2021, many bodies of young children ranging from the age of 3 and above were found buried in mass grave sites at these former residential schools, leading many to call for change. As a result, a holiday not for celebration, but rather reflection on the atrocities this nation committed against its original inhabitants was created.
Please show your respect and reflect on the atrocity committed by the residential school. Many will continue to wear bright orange shirt this coming holiday, just like the annual days of Orange Shirt Day. Let us show our respect on September 30th, the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.